Hey guys, how's it going? So in this video, I'm going to attempt at a very high level to explain to you guys how game developers, AAA, indies, and everything in between plan their games to the best of the capabilities and how they differ and how planning it in a visual way, just like this, helps us a ton. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to another video, and it's refreshing to be in front of a wall instead of being in front of a computer. We are going analog today, but before I start, I want to just tell you guys, remind you guys about my animation workshop. I have this workshop that I've been working on last year quite hard, and it's starting beginning of February. So I highly recommend you guys kind of come in, join me. It's going to be 4 weeks of intense work so you guys can start 2025 in the best way possible. So I hope to see you guys there. Check out the link down below to find out more. Okay, so before I actually explain this wall, I want to explain a little bit about how things used to be done when I at least started in around 2003 or so. So there's this software that's been used for a long time and is still used to this day, that is by this company called Atlassian, I want to say. It's incredibly robust, but visually it's not great. And us as artists, as most people in the games industry, we need a visual way of organizing our stuff. Now, this company called Atlassian, there's two pieces of software that I used incredibly effectively in games till this day. One is called Confluence. Confluence is used for documentation for the most part. And we also have Jira. And Jira is used for task management, like bug tracking. There's a bunch of different tracking things that happen. And to me, as an artist, and to most of my peers, it feels like it's not the best way to visually represent where the game is going and what kind of things have been done so far. So this is how things used to be done from 2000 to 2010. Now, in about 2010, I want to say, at least for me, that's when I first saw it, this system called the Scrum system started coming across into game development. And it's actually quite interesting because over the years I realized how powerful it is to have a visual representation of the tasks that you are doing. And I didn't know at the time when I was working and as I was a young animator, a young developer with very little experience, how much this visual representation of the progress of the game matters for all developers involved. And there's a bunch of different reasons why this is important. First, we are all visual creatures, especially in game development, and we need to see how our work is actually impacting the game, what's being done, what hasn't been done, what needs to be done. So that's number one. Number two is really satisfying to see your work progressing through the stages. Now, I'm going to go in depth now on this Scrum system, but I just want you guys to know that not all studios actually work in this way. This Scrum system has been evolved and now is actually like way more complex, but this is hopefully a very much top-down view, super simplistic way of how some things would work in games development as you are progressing through tasks, right? So here, the Scrum system is basically a system that allows you to plan, build, test, and review. And these 4 steps happen over and over and over again over many years that the game gets developed. Now, the planning normally is to do with production, the directors, the designers, and all this other stuff. Building is the act of doing what you are actually supposed to be doing. So if you're an animator or if you're an artist, you are creating assets. If you're a designer, you're designing the game. You hopefully get the idea. Testing is very much the idea of failing fast, right? So you planned, you built, we tested, and then we see how much we get. Now that we actually have the test, we review it, and then between a team of people, we see how good or bad the idea is. And if it's bad, we go back to the beginning and we start planning again, and then we build again, and then we test again, and then we review again. And we start doing this over and over again so we can basically progress through the game. Bad ideas get discarded, good ideas get done, right? So hopefully you understand that. Now, another layer within the Scrum is what happens on a daily basis. And for here, I need to stop a little bit because I need for you guys to understand more or less what happens on a daily basis in a game studio. Now, in some of the biggest studios that I worked on, the Segas, the EAs and stuff, what happens is that like there's a lot of tasks to be done over time, and the closer you get to release, the more certain features need attention. Now, normally a team works together within the team. So you have the art team, you have the animation team, you have the design team, audio team, engineering, and they're all kind of together in a way that they kind of just stick together so they can develop things in a linear fashion. But towards the end of the game, we will normally create what we call strike teams. And these strike teams is very much, instead of being just the animation team working together, all of a sudden you have an animator, an engineer, an artist, and a sound designer, let's say. And we are trying to tackle a problem within the game that needs to be solved in order for us to progress forward. And the reason why we do that is because games, as I mentioned many times in this channel, it's very much a team effort, right? And there's certain features that if you just take 5 people and then say, focus on this thing, and then until it's solved, don't come back to your team, just stay in this thing, actually ends up being the best thing possible. Otherwise, if the teams continue to be separated, things don't quite work. Now, before we continue, let me tell you a little bit about today's sponsor, Cambachi. Now, Cambachi is a very powerful project management software that takes all the visual workflows that I was just showing you with Post-its in a digital form and makes them available to any team out there. It's designed to fit right into your workflow with features like task boards, real-time collaboration, and seamless integration. Whether you're working on an indie game or a AAA studio, I think Cambachi can help your team stay organized and make use of Kanban boards in a really great way. Check the link in the description to find out more. Now, let's get back to it. So, enter the stand-ups. So, years ago, unfortunately, because of COVID and how things work right now, normally people work remotely. But when people used to work in an office, what we used to do every day in the morning in several studios that I've been is a stand-up. And what a stand-up is very much people standing here, just like I am right now, in a circle in front of a wall, kind of like going through a task. So for example, let's say that we're working on a specific character, like a new character in our game, right? We basically are just getting started and we are working on this character and we're trying to actually prove that this character is good for our game. Now, we need an artist, an animator, we most likely need an audio designer so we can actually add some kind of sound to it, an engineer to implement it, a tech animator to rig it. So there's a few disciplines that need to actually be a part of this scrum, of this stand-up. So we gather together in this specific team, this strike team, and then we actually stand in a circle in front of a wall, and then we are looking at character number 1. Let's say instead of Scrum, it says character number 1, and we are all working towards the idea that this character needs to be in game and it needs to be playable, at least like the very basics and idle, and so basically the game director can see it. So now we are in the phase of planning, right? So we actually, before we did this wall, we basically did a lot of planning in order to actually find out what needs to be done for us to actually get that character. So we realized that we need character design. So this is the step where a designer is actually sitting down on paper and kind of trying to design a character that is as interesting as possible, as original as possible, as unique as possible. We also find out that we need a character model, because obviously we need a model in order to move the character around in 3D. We need rigging, because obviously for the character to move, it needs to have bones and it needs to move. We also need animations, variations. So we need animation number 1, number 2. I just added a couple here. We need sounds, otherwise everything is mute and there's no sound. We need to implement stuff in game, and we also need VFX in order to actually have all the pizzazz, all the magic. Let's say it's a magical character. So this is the stuff that we've done. This is the stuff that we planned. Great. Now we need to build it over time, right? So all of this stuff doesn't happen at the same time. So because it doesn't happen at the same time, we need to start finding out what goes first, second, and third in order for us to kind of move these things along until it's done, right? So game design is definitely first, because without game design, nothing gets done. So game design will most likely, while we're standing up, we'll ask the game designer, have you started designing the character? And he goes, yeah, it's in progress. So you go ahead and move that to this part and it feels satisfying, going back to that satisfaction. Okay, cool. If you don't have design, we don't have anything else. So anything else stays here. We're just waiting for the game designer to finish his job so we can move on to other things. So while the character is actually being reviewed, we can do a few things. We can start on the character model, right? This is in progress while this is being reviewed, so things don't have to just be done before you do. So you can start to see that eventually we're going to start to see a lot of things moving along at the same time. So game design is being reviewed, which means that it's basically being close to being done. We might have to go back a little bit to progress because maybe the game director didn't like it. So we might actually be here for a while, but eventually the game design is going to be done, but not quite yet. The character model is starting, and now we actually know that we need to actually have a task for rigging, but we cannot start any of this before we have the character model. Okay, so now the game design has been through a few iterations, and now it's done, right? And the character model is in review. Once the character model is in review, what happens is that you go through a first pass of a model where the character model is not quite finished, but it's good enough for us animation department and rigging department to start working on it. So we can start doing this rigging, right? We can send this to tech animation so they can start rigging a first model of our character model while it's being in review. Now, character design doesn't have to do anything except for keeping tabs as soon as we actually go through a certain point here. So rigging is being done, character model is being done. We might once again go back through a few iterations of this, but eventually this also gets done, and rigging is now in review, which is normally with the animation director or the animation lead to make sure that it's really, really good. Now, if rigging is in review, we can start playing with animations, right? So let's say we have 2 animators in the team. We can actually start doing both animations at the same time, 1 animation each. Now, the rigging is in review. Normally, these animators are playing with this rig as they actually are doing this stuff, which means that at this point we are stress testing the rig to make sure that it can fit any animation that we do in the future. If it doesn't fly with the animation team, it means that basically we need to go back to in progress and then go back to done. Let's say the animators are actually playing with it, they liked it, amazing, means that rigging is also done. And now we're off to the races, because what comes after is a bunch of different departments kind of like pushing the ball here and there, which is actually quite fun. So animation 1 is actually starting to look really good. Animation 2, not so much. Okay, so now that we are here, animation is normally in the middle of the pipe. Now that we are here, now sound starts to get interested in this because they need to start adding sound, right? So if you say the animation 1 is in review, sound goes, okay, so we can actually start progressing on this animation 1, the sound, so we can basically have a block out of this sound, right? So basically they start working on this. Now animation 2 gets done as well. Animation 1, because it was all good from the beginning, now it's done, and sound is actually implemented. This sound here, so now it's in review as well. Animation 2 starts to actually look better, and sound is actually starting to work on animation 2. Now we start to get into game implementation. Now, this is the moment that we all been waiting for, from the game design all the way to see it in game, because after all, that's what we actually want to do. So we start with the progress of game implementation. Reminder that this normally is overviewed by a producer. The producer will be the person in front of this wall saying, have you done this? Have you done this other thing? Animation, rigging, is this done? And the producer will actually be the one moving these things around. So game implementation started. They already have a character model that they can be implemented. They have the character model needs to be rigged in engine as well, not just in Maya, so also that can be implemented. And they have 1 animation to start playing with, which means that we have enough to start to see the character moving around in the level, which is exciting for everybody. Now, this has been implemented. Animation 2 has now been approved after much iteration. The sound of animation 2 starts as well, so the sound is still working on their stuff. And then, because the first animation has been implemented, implementing the second animation is a little bit easier, which means that game implementation is now in review because the character is moving about, right? Now, even after we actually have the character implemented in game, it doesn't really mean that we are done, because there's a lot of things, and once again, I kept it simple, that need to happen when things are in game, and one of those is VFX. VFX only can start working on their stuff once they see things in engine, because VFX happen in engine, is physics, so it happens in engine. There's a bunch of other things that happen in engine as well. Let's say we have a cape, let's say we have hair, environments, all of that stuff can only happen after this stuff, right? So now the sound is done for all animations and it's been reviewed and now it's been approved. It's great stuff. Game implementation normally stays in review for quite a while because VFX needs to get to here and then it needs to get to here, and only then we can actually see game implementation done. So once all of this is done, now the game director can have a play and they can see how the game implementation of all these tasks has been in game. And if he's happy with it, now for this one feature, we can say that it's done. So that is, in the most simplistic way, a way for me to explain to you what happens in a development cycle when working in one feature. Now, this gets incredibly complex the bigger the game, the bigger the studio, and you can start to see how this becomes a little bit messy. Now, in some of the studios that I worked in, we had walls upon walls upon walls, full of post-its of all kinds of colors, just like this, that were actually moved about. Now, there was something incredibly fun to just see things being done around the walls. I remember specifically at EA Dice, when I was there working on the battlefields and the battlefronts, there were so many walls full of post-its everywhere. But it was cool because you could read the name of the feature and then you could see at a glance immediately how much of the feature was done and where it was at any one point. Obviously, you have to be very careful not to drop any post-it, but we actually kind of kept tabs of things like this. Now, this is just a visual representation of what is in digital. We all had the tasks in the software that I mentioned initially called Jira, to make sure that we actually kind of like covering every task. But if you're not a producer, normally Jira is not a tool that you want to spend a lot of time in. Normally you spend time as an animator, as an artist, to tick that you've done the task, right? Or to check where the progress is. But to me, at least, looking at a wall full of post-its is much more exciting to me than looking at a white wall of tasks, right? So this is why it was so good. Now, fast forward to today, there's a lot of software that actually use a thing called Kanban. So a Kanban board, as you guys might have heard, is basically this, but in a digital fashion. So Kambachi, our sponsor of today, is one of those softwares that actually allow you to basically grab cards and move them around, but it goes further because a lot of these softwares, whenever you have a task, so rigging, it basically merges what I just mentioned about Jira, which is basically a task management system, and basically allows you to pin to this one post-it what's inside the post-it and what progress has been made within this post-it. And this is basically what a Kanban board does, and things have been progressing to a point where you can use, as a small studio like we have used at Proxima, just a simple Kanban board. There's a bunch of different software that has it, that basically allows you for a relatively cheap amount to basically have a really solid system just like this that allows you and your small team to see progression of your tasks over time, but also make it incredibly enjoyable, right? And if you do have a space, and if you're a small indie studio, and if you kind of like have walls around your studio, I highly recommend this, because there's nothing better than having a visual like board of where you are, where you're going, and where you've been. And then basically, as soon as this task is done, or as soon as you clear this wall, you know that this is done because it's no longer important. So all of a sudden, you don't have to stare at it anymore. It feels incredibly good. So the moral of the story is this: you can either use physical boards or digital boards, but regardless of what system you use, make sure you use a system that works for you. And hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight on how people actually keep tabs on what department needs to do what, and also how you close games with these strike teams. Now, if you're still here, I have a question for you guys. If you have worked in any studio or you have used a system like this, what is your favorite software? Please share. There's so many out there right now, and I'm always curious to try new ones to see what fits best. That's all we had for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and as always, stay well, stay safe. Peace.